actually live, but I don't know when this like it no longer says the stream title in chat anymore. It really bothers me.
Yeah, I noticed that yesterday. That's really weird. I'm not seeing an include audio option. Like, is that already handled or?
Because I'm not streaming from my Xbox.
Oh, okay. Sounds good. Ooh, this PowerPoint's incredible. Oh my God.
You like?
Yeah, yeah. This is great.
I'm glad you got the email. Let's see here. Justin says, "What the fuck?" Yeah, dude. Yeah, we didn't do a great job reminding people this was gonna happen.
No, we sure didn't. But people can see it when they choose.
Justin, no.
What?
Wow.
Oh my God.
Come on, guys.
The disrespect. Actually, could you post your stream link in the podcasts channel instead of streams? Yeah. Thanks.
Who did you used to do not power rankings, BetterCast with? Was that Morty?
Yeah, I mean, I've done some with Morty. There was a user that used to be here named B-Man that I used to do a couple with. Yeah, it's mostly been Morty, honestly, because Morty also lives in Seattle and knows like easy to meet up.
Most of my podcasts were with Acid and Gatto, and Gatto's pretty much just completely out of Madden at this point.
Oh yeah.
All right, we're up to 5 viewers. Let's go ahead and get rolling here. Thank you all for joining. We've got a special edition of the BetterCast featuring Connor's Power Rankings and more, presented by Better League Network, hosted by myself, CMAS, and the man of the hour, Mr. Connor. Don't know your last name. Rice. Actually, it is Rice,
Yes.
isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. You got it perfectly.
I panicked and then I knew it. Anyways, Connor Rice, how you feeling today, man?
I'm feeling good. Thank you for hosting this, and thank you for bringing a level of professionalism to this that we've frankly never had before. I'll just give my brief, I guess, spiel in terms of how this is going to work, and then we can get started. We are beginning this with the typical 32-team power ranking segments that you all are so used to by this point, and then we are going to dive, into a mailbag segment. As far as 32 team power rankings go, you've heard me give this explanation so many times before. I'm sure people can practically recite it with me at this point. These rankings are in a vacuum. What does that mean for you new users? That means I don't care about last season. I don't care about what you've accomplished in past seasons, past cycles, like how good you've been historically. Only this season matters. It is in a vacuum. One other quick thing I'll say before we get started is I submitted these power rankings last night so that CMAS can make the beautiful PowerPoint that you're all about to see. For that reason, there have been some results that I'm not factoring into the power rankings that happened, either last night or today. Now I don't think any of these results would really like drastically impact my power rankings, but if you see, for example, if you see me say something that like slightly contradicts what the PowerPoint says, or if you see me give like an incorrect record, that hasn't taken one of the games into account, that's why. I'm mostly prepared for this last night, so it's not completely up to date, but it's close enough. With that being said, CMAS, let's get this thing started.
Let's do it. Lucky for you, I didn't put the records in there for you.
Okay, good.
But also, feel free to comment in Twitch chat. If you comment in Slack chat, I may miss it, so make sure you put it in Twitch chat, so that way I can, any sort of questions or comments, we'll feel free to get to those. But let's go ahead and get rolling with the, in Connor's opinion, worst team in Better League, 32nd overall, and that's going to be the Miami Dolphins with, I did put the records in, just kidding. At the time was 1-7, offense last, defense number 26. Connor, take it away.
Yes, and you just brought up, people may already be asking in the Twitch chat, why do I have a winless Detroit Lions team ahead of this Miami Dolphins team? The reason for that is this is not only the most impotent offense of this season, it may be the most impotent offense of the entire Madden 20 cycle. They lose their games by an average of 21 points per game, despite a pretty mediocre strength of schedule. Like you look at Ass's schedule so far. It's not exactly been like a world-beating schedule that he's faced, and yet he continues to get blown out by damn near everyone he faces. Jacob Culver, in the hands of the right user, I talked about this in my last podcast episode. He should have been an elite drafted. I should say, an elite like generated player, an elite generated quarterback for the Better League with his 95 throw power and decent accuracy stats. But he has truly fallen off the wagon this year. 6 touchdowns, 27 interceptions on the year. It's for those reasons mostly that I think, again, despite the one win that Asa was able to pick up, overall, when you take the whole season into account, he is, in my opinion, the worst team, the 32nd ranked team in this season so far.
And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but do you know who his one win was against?
Well, you've just exposed me. Let me check real quick.
I'm sorry.
Unfortunately,
I didn't mean to, but
no, you're all good. I want to say it was against the Bengals, if I'm remembering correctly. I know it was not to a very good team. If it were against the team that was even remotely in playoff contention, I would not have put them in the 32 spot. But it was definitely against the bottom 10 team. I know that for sure.
Awesome. All right, Dolphins are the worst team in the league. Sorry, Acid. It seems to carry over league to league. All right, let's go ahead and move to number 31, the second to last worst team, the Detroit Lions, who originally was Gatto, now I believe is Austin. 22nd overall offense, number 18 defense. Not good.
Yeah, I guess Austin's joining. I still don't believe he's actually joined the league yet, so we'll see what ends up happening. I do give the Lions slight credit for their form's gotten better as the season's gone on, meaning that blowout losses are turning into close losses. Their last 2 results, and also one other thing I should say is I don't care about like force wins, force losses. I'm treating every single result as if it were an actual user v user game. So like, don't tell me that a certain game was like a force win or force loss because I don't care. But recently they had a 4-point loss to the Bears and a 3-point loss to the Giants, who I consider to be a playoff contender. So I do give them some credit for that. I don't exactly know what Austin's going to bring to the table moving forward. It doesn't look like, just based on early impressions, it doesn't look like he's going to be the most dedicated user moving forward. But he does have an easy schedule moving forward. He has a couple of games against other bottom 5 actually teams. They may be able to pick up a couple wins. So I don't expect the Lions to finish the season, for the season. I expect them to pick up a couple wins moving forward. But yeah, they're my 31st ranked team.
Moving on from number 31 to number 30, we have the interception specialist, Mike, with the Dallas Cowboys, with the 18th overall offense, but 31st ranked defense.
Yeah, I mean, that 18th ranked offense is like the biggest lie there's ever been. That's just based on a couple chunk plays and not much else, if I'm honest with you. Sorry, Mike. We have talked as a league, we have waxed poetic about how truly horrific of a season Chris Hilton had last year. I believe he had somewhere around, 72 interceptions, I think was the official number.
Pretty close.
He is actually on track to have an even worse season than last season. He's on track to have more interceptions and a lower passing rating, as well as fewer touchdowns. So we may have a back-to-back worst quarterback of all time in the history of the Better League contender there. He lost 82-16 to Lucky Choose 49ers. I'm not going to break up a ton of specific results over the course of this because that's kind of boring to listen to. But whenever you give up 82 points, it has to be mentioned. They are the one team in this power rankings with no bright spots whatsoever. Passing offense, trash. Rushing offense, garbage. Defense, incompetent. So again, you may be asking, why did I rank them? Why did I not rank them 32nd? A couple of, close losses. When you're in the bottom 10, close losses matter a lot, and I do give Mike credit for keeping it competitive against a couple of users. Unlike Acid, unlike Austin, but that's a very minor compliment. It's been a really, really bad season in Dallas.
Moving on from this terrible season for Dallas to the 29th ranked team, I think they had the first overall pick, Cincinnati Bengals from last year's draft. Nick with the 23rd ranked offense, but the number 9 defense.
Yeah, so on paper, when you look at the stats, when you look at the box scores, it's kind of tough to know exactly what the issue is because I mean, they're definitely not world beaters either through the air or on the ground, but it's not like they're awful necessarily in either category. No, it's not like he's throwing interceptions all over the yard. His starting halfback, and I apologize for forgetting what his name is, but his starting halfback's averaging around 5 yards a carry, which, like, that's not terrible by any stretch. I mean, there are far, far worse rushing attacks in the league just in terms of pure efficiency. And I do also give Nick credit for a close loss against Baltimore in Week 1 and a difficult strength of schedule. He's faced a lot of playoff contenders. He's had the most difficult strength of schedule of any team that I've mentioned so far. So I give him credit for that. And I mean, the record doesn't lie. I know he is 1-6, but on the face of it, it's tough to know exactly what the issue is. But clearly there are some because he has the record he has.
Moving on from Cincinnati Bengals, going to the 28th ranked team. This is a better league favorite. That would be Taint with the Carolina Panthers. 26th ranked offense, 30th ranked defense.
Wildly enough, this is actually the best ranking that Taint has ever had in one of my power ranking segments, so I congratulate him from that. He's crawled up from the bottom. He got one gasp of air, and that's pretty much it. But congrats to him on that. He has a truly efficient ground game. Now, when I say truly efficient, don't compare them to like the kings of the world. But as far as bottom 10 users go, he does probably have the best ground game. Cedric Short, his starting halfback, averages 6 yards per carry and is leaned on pretty heavily. But of course, Ronald Finney continues to shoot Carolina in the foot. Their one win was against the 0-7 Lions. So again, how much credit can you really give the user for beating a winless team? And again, I'm not sure this is going to exactly line up with what you have on your PowerPoint, but they give up 40 points per game and 412 yards per game, both of which are obviously bottom 5 in the league. Again, ground game's the lone bright spot, but Ronald Finney's awful, like a truly inefficient quarterback. Not quite Chris Hilton level, fortunately, but really, really bad. And their entire defense is just pretty much non-existent.
I imagine Hilton would be what we would expect if Nathan Peterman actually played a full season as a starter in real life.
Yeah, like if the Bills way back in the day had been forced to start Peterson for the entire season, I think this is about what we would have seen. I think you're right, yeah.
Moving on from Taint, who I think is retired, his gamer tag is Taint. He is now known as something different.
Yes.
I forget what it is.
Dealing debt, I think.
Dealing debt, yeah.
Something like that.
He's still going to be Taint to everybody, but officially retiring the Taint gamer tag, RIP. Moving to team 27. Another team that was picked up halfway through. This is the Philadelphia Eagles. Austin, the Scranton Scum. 20th ranked offense, 32nd ranked defense.
Now, who among us would have thought that at the halfway point of the season that Austin's Philadelphia Eagles would be ranked 27th? I can say for sure that this is the worst ranking that Austin's ever had. This might be the worst ranking that Austin ever has in one of my podcasts moving forward, but regardless, that's the situation we find ourselves in. They did have a statement 28-24 win that you and I, CMAS, were fortunate enough to announce in Week 4 against Cody's New York Giants. But other than that, the season's been pretty ugly. I do want to kind of call out Cody because, everyone roasts my predictions, but I remember Cody saying in one of his predictions earlier in the season that Austin was his Super Bowl favorite, that he thought Austin, the Scranton Scum, as you, or the Cranston Scrum, I suppose, as you.
Is it Cranston? Oh,
so kind of. Cranston, yeah. I mean, might as well be Scranton, honestly. But that's just an awful prediction from Cody, and I hate to call him out, but he is the most toxic user, so I kind of feel like I have to. They also, they lost to Cam's Chicago Bears, not a good loss if you're a user of Austin's quality, and they put up 14 points and 7 points, respectively, against Chase and Cody, which are the two, I'd say, elite users they've faced so far. So something isn't right in Philly. I don't know if Austin's not locked in. I don't know if he is just, having trouble with this specific roster for whatever reason, but again, you and I, CMAT, saw the one highlight of Austin's season. Otherwise, it's been very rough, and I have him at number 27 for that reason.
That game is still archived on Twitch. CMAS 231.
It was a great game. I'd recommend people watch it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Moving on from the other Austin to the 26th ranked team. This would be the Washington, can't say the name, Filunica with the 27th ranked offense and the 19th ranked defense.
We know that Ryan is a fan of calling for Taylor Rapp to be moved to linebacker, but that alone will not fix the most broken pass defense in the league. They give up more passing yards than any other team in the better league. They've given up 34 points or more 7 out of the 8 games they've played so far, including to the Lions and Cowboys, which, as I mentioned before, are for sure 2 of the worst offenses in the league. I do give them credit, much like I gave, who was it? I gave Tank credit for a truly efficient ground game. I do give the Redskins credit for a pretty solid ground game. Kerryon Johnson is the headlining running back there. Again, around 6 yards per carry against decent competition. But that alone, as we've seen, cannot carry this team. And it's, other than the users who are like always bottom 5, like the Mikes and the Taints, I think we expect a little more from Ryan. For all of the users that have like actual expectations placed on their shoulders, he definitely has the worst defense, the defense that has capitulated the most. So I can't give him too much credit for having an explosive ground game.
Moving on from another NFC East team, going to the 25th ranked team, and that would be the Houston Texans, owned by Phil, with the 17th ranked offense and 24th ranked defense.
All right, now I'm going to start this off with a couple of compliments, but believe me, they won't last. This is the first team we've talked about with a league average passing and rushing attack. They're not awful. In fact, they're more than not awful. They're league average through the air and on the ground. So again, for a bottom 10 team, you have to give them credit for that. You also have to give them credit for keeping it close against elite competition. They beat the Chargers outright, and they had 1 possession losses against the Kansas City Chiefs and the Tennessee Titans. So again, close losses matter. Close losses will bump you up in the power rankings. But their most recent result was a horrific, a truly awful 38-7 loss to the Bengals in Week 8. And they also, again, for a user of Phil's quality, for a user who has won multiple Super Bowls in the Bear League before, albeit in Madden 18, to not have anything you can really hang your hat on as a team is pretty rough, especially, with they haven't played the best schedule necessarily, so that's kind of rough from Phil's perspective. They also have one of the most difficult remaining schedules in the league. They play Wozy, Triple H, CMAS, they play Dan, and they play Alex. But given the fact that they've, they've kept it close against the Chiefs, they've kept it close against the Titans, look for them to play spoiler in someone's playoff race. That's all I'm going to say. Wozy's kind of like on the edge of playoff contention. CMAS, you're in a pretty difficult division right now. Look for them to maybe, knock off a user and get an important result. Maybe not in their own season, but in someone else's season. But despite that, Phil, 25th.
And I think it's about right. I remember the day that Phil used to be a dominant player, always kind of fighting for the conference championship and Super Bowls, and it just seems like last 2 Maddens haven't been kind to him. So it seems about right. Let's go ahead and move on to number 24 with the AFC East team, the Buffalo Bills, owned by Cook, with the 29th ranked offense and the 21st ranked defense.
The same Buffalo Bills that came damn close to knocking me off earlier. Probably should have knocked me off, honestly. I think Cook outplayed me for the majority of that game. Cook, strategically he does a good job. He smartly leans on Miles Sanders, who does have both the jukebox and human joystick abilities, who's had a pretty efficient season so far. Definitely an efficient performance against me. I saw that firsthand. But he is the first 3-win team that I've mentioned, and the reasons for that are his 3 wins are against teams with a combined 5 wins, meaning he has not beaten a team with more than 2 wins on the season yet. And his defense, although they do show up against bad teams, he does clamp down his fellow bottom 10 users. They get truly torn apart by everyone else. And finally, their last issue as a team is they have allowed 54 sacks on the year already, which is 10 more than any other user in the league. He's taken over a full sack more per game than anyone else in this league. So a lack of pocket presence. I don't know if it's his offensive line. I don't know if he's calling, a lot of long developing routes and getting sacked more as a result. But when you're not the most explosive offensive user in the world, you can't do that. I mean, I would definitely recommend Cook to, maybe adapt more of a West Coast offense. Lean on Miles Sanders perhaps even more. Go to the short passing game. He does have a decent receiving core when you look at that Bills roster, but scheme-wise in the passing game is just not working, and he's facing too many second long start and longs as a result.
Moving on from the Buffalo Bills to an AFC West team ranked 23rd overall, and that would be the Oakland Raiders, owned by Chap, with the 31st ranked offense, but a number 6 ranked defense.
Chap, you're finally not last in my power rankings, dude. Congrats. Of all of the teams, there's always a team in my power rankings where I just really, really struggle to find anything to talk about. A lot of what I say in these power rankings are based on narratives. Maybe you've had like a truly impressive win here, a truly inexplicable loss there. You have a strength, a weakness that I can identify and kind of like extrapolate stuff from. But this is a team, they've beaten two fellow bottom 10 teams, and every loss they've had is understandable. Like, every loss they've had is against a team that's higher than them on these power rankings. So, like, you can't really knock them too highly for this. Their passing game, their ground game, both below average, but not awful. And their defense, it's fine. It's meh. So I just, like, there's really not much to talk about with these Oakland Raiders. They're just like a prototypical below average but not awful team, the 25th percentile, I guess, in this league. And that's, I guess, really all I have to say about the Raiders. It's just kind of, you just kind of have to shrug your shoulders. They're just kind of, they are what they are at this point.
They are what they are. They are who we thought they were. Moving on to number 22. We've got another AFC West team. We've got the Denver Broncos, owned by Gamble, with the 25th ranked offense and 27th ranked defense.
As far as turnovers go, they have the most efficient offense of any team with a losing record. But keep in mind, efficient doesn't mean explosive. They're extraordinarily conservative in the passing game, and it kind of bears out in terms of their, as I mentioned, their overall offensive rating. They just don't move the ball particularly efficiently. They've had an easy strength of schedule. They've only played two teams that I would consider like actual, elite competition, the Chargers and the Jaguars, and they got blown out in both of those. So, that 3-4 record on the one hand, you can say, hey, still in playoff contention, you can build on a 3-4 record. But keep in mind that the two teams he's played, they're playoff competitors. He's gotten blown out against both of them. Their second half of the schedule is much, much more difficult than the first. They have 5 teams that are in the top 15 in my power rankings remaining in their schedule, and I believe that they have no path to the playoffs. Again, despite like not the worst record in the world, but I just don't think it's happening for Dr. Gamble this year. Will it happen any year? We'll find out.
Dark days ahead, according to Connor, for the Denver Broncos. Let's go ahead and move on to the 21st ranked team, an AFC South team with the Indianapolis Colts, with Cloud, who actually has the number 8 ranked offense and the 20th ranked defense.
So you do have to give Cloud some benefit of the doubt here because they've played an extraordinarily hard schedule. 5 losses so far. Their losses, they lost to Dan twice, they lost to Alex, they lost to Triple H, and they lost to UCMass. All of those users are playoff competitors, and a couple of them are Super Bowl competitors. So, despite the 3-5 record, you do have to give Cloud some benefit of the doubt there. But he has not been really competitive in any of those games, except for the one against the Titans, which was a 1-possession loss. But all of those, all of the remaining games, I should say, were either like semi-blowouts or just true laughers. It's kind of interesting. Last year, their pass defense was really, really good. I believe they ended up having the 3rd-ranked pass defense in the league in terms of yards allowed, and their rush defense is really bad. But we've had the inverse happen this year. Their pass defense, they're just giving up chunk plays through the air pretty consistently, but their running defense all of a sudden is really good. Like, I don't know, maybe it's a tactical adjustment that Cloud's made. I don't really know, like, what the deal is, having not watched one of his games yet, but that is just something I wanted to identify because I thought that was interesting. Tough schedule, kind of a rough start to the season, 3-5, maybe not fully reflective of, like, how he's actually playing, but regardless, you got to at least compete in some of those games, and I've Cloud at 21st because he generally isn't.
Yeah, here's one that I think that would potentially be higher if he was in a different division. Okay. He just has a tougher schedule. But I feel like based on his record and everything like that, and like you said, his performance in big games, 21 seems fair. Dan says, wow. Not sure if he means that's too high or too low. Feel free, anyone that's still in here, go ahead. I'm still in here. Of course, you're all still in here. Feel free to go ahead and mention the Twitch chat, any comments, any feedback, anything like that. Call Connor crazy for putting people way too high, way too low. Perfectly fine. Move on to number 20 here. Number 20, we've got, we're going into the NFC West here. We got the Los Angeles Rams, owned by Steele, with the darn almost worst offense with number 30, but the 11th ranked defense.
Yeah, we're really delving into the NFC West here, as people will see a bit later on in these power rankings. This is a tale of two halves of the season so far. Obviously, Steele famously, after predicting himself to go 15-0-1 on the year, he started the season 0-4. We laughed him out of the building. We thought that he was going to be, a bottom 10, maybe even bottom 5 team this year. But since then, he has really turned up. He's had a 4-game winning streak. They're now at 500 on the season, 4-4. Unfortunately, their 27-24 win against Ben in Week 6 is really the only win of those 4 that they can even remotely brag about. The other 3 were against bottom 10 teams, but there is still something to be said for beating the teams that you should. That's definitely a skill that I do not possess, so I give Steele credit for that. What's changed between, I mentioned this tale of two halves. What's changed between the two is Deshaun Watson has really gotten going here. He had 4 combined touchdowns in the first 4 games and 12 in the second 4. The passing game has really turned up so far. As I'm sure you know, being in the division, anyone in the NFC West really still has a shot at the division. Again, when you look at the records, when you look at the remaining schedules, it really is a 4-man race at this point. And I do think, not to put pressure on you specifically, CMAS, but I do think that you still have to play them twice. I think those games are going to be very, very critical to both of your playoff hopes. Both of you should be taking those games very seriously for sure, and I'm sure both of you will be. But those games, I think, will directly impact playoff chances for both of you.
Oh yeah, ton of credit for Steele turning his team around. Too much reliant on Todd Gurley, gets hurt, and then he took 4 games to figure out what he wanted to do, and then Deshaun Watson got going. And yeah, every NFC West divisional game is essentially a playoff game from here on out because it's just like you said, a 4-man race.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and move on. Go ahead if you want to finish it up.
I was just gonna say, people argue about whether momentum's an actual thing or not in real life sports. I do think momentum, game to game, is absolutely a thing in Madden. You feel good about your scheme. If you're piling up win after win after win, you feel good about what you've got going. I think playing confident is just extremely important in Madden in general in terms of how you perform. So the fact that he's on a 4-game winning streak, maybe look for him to make a playoff push here. It's very possible. We'll have to see what happens, but I do think Steele should be, as he said, given credit for dealing with the early wounds, dealing with the early 0-4 start, and now putting himself back in the playoff push.
Moving to number 19, a former Better League champion, we have the New England Patriots with Morty, who's got the 28th ranked offense and the 7th best defense.
This hurts my heart because I love Morty. He's probably my favorite user in this league. Long-time BetterCast co-host. But I know, I'm sorry. Maybe win a Super Bowl and then we'll say. But what's happened is, I know, right? Coming from me, I have no prayer of ever doing anything, so take that for what it's worth. We all had thought, especially given the run to the AFC Championship game and his nearly beating Dan in the last playoff race. We thought that he had figured out his passing game. We thought that Morty had maybe finally adapted to Madden 20, at least in the passing game. But all of a sudden, Tyree Jackson has regressed horribly. He has a negative touchdown to interception ratio. He frankly has had the worst passing season since, I want to say, the very first season of Madden 20, which was really, really bad from Morty's perspective. But it has been good. I do give, two of the Patriots' losses have been against my number 1 and number 2 in the power rankings. I won't tip off who they are yet, obviously. But we were just mentioning how important those divisional games are. They had back-to-back losses against Wozzy's New York Jets and Cook's Buffalo Bills. And if you're Morty, those are unacceptable. Morty is known as much as any other user in this league for divisional dominance. He has put the clamps on the AFC East for, really ever since Madden 18 with Cody's Buffalo Bills. But you can't lose those games if you're Morty, and those I think will come back to bite him later on. Morty's had a couple of impressive statement wins, but when you look at the whole resume, and again, not to tip off the mailbag segment, but I do think it's pretty undeniable that the Jets and not the Patriots should be considered the divisional favorites moving forward.
Yeah, Morty had a magical run in the playoffs last year. I got to commentate a few of those games, and it just seemed like it was meant to be, and fought the eventual Super Bowl champion very, very hard at the end of the game, and had a magical run, but it looks like that run stopped in Jacksonville. Funny that you say 1 and 2, and I guess we'll find out why. But let's go ahead and move on to number 18. 18, back to the NFC West. We've got the San Francisco 49ers with Lucky Chew 36 with the 12th best offense and almost the worst defense at number 29.
So listen, does Lucky Chew deserve to be above Steele and Morty in these power rankings? Probably not. But anytime you put up 82 points on another user, again, you're going to get bumped up a couple spots in the power rankings. It just is what it is. I'm not above, being petty. I mentioned again, I'm gonna keep identifying divisional results. In Week 8, they lost 41-30 against the LA Rams, and then of course, CMAS, I'm sure you remember, they beat you 26-24 in Week 3. Those I'm sure will all have ramifications for Lucky Chew moving forward. He, another, I guess, legitimate reason why I have him so high despite his record is he's had one of the hardest strengths of schedule so far. He's played a bunch of playoff contenders, really, very few bottom feeders on his schedule to speak of. They could conceivably, and this is assuming that they're able to sweep UCMass, but like other than that game, their next 3 games are incredibly easy. They should beat everyone. So, if they are able to beat you and end up, what's their updated record? Is it 3-5 or 4-5?
Off the top of my head, I think it's 4-5.
Okay, so if they're able to end up being 8-5 at that point, I think they would probably be considered probably the divisional favorites or close to it. So if you're Lucky Chew, now's the time to put up or shut up. This is probably the most important stretch of games he's had all season, and we hype up the matchups between elite users, but often these matchups against like borderline wildcard teams are actually the matchups that end up having more playoff implications moving forward. So watch these games. I'm talking to the rest of the league now. Watch these games that Lucky Chew is about to play because they're going to impact playoff hopes for multiple teams moving forward.
I like this spot for Lucky. I think it's right where he needs to be. Solid user. I like him. Let's move on to number 17, his NFC West rival Seattle Seahawks. Alex with the 10th best offense, but the 22nd ranked defense.
Don't let 10th ranked offense is pretty good, but it doesn't necessarily jump off the page. But don't let that fool you. This is an offense that can put up points against anyone and has put up points against anyone. They average the most yards per game of any offense in this league, 405. And again, without question, this is absolutely the best, the most efficient offense of anyone we've talked about so far, is in general. But their defense, especially their run defense, is pretty atrocious, especially given they've had a pretty mediocre strength of schedule so far. So,
hey,
this is one of those classic, like, I guess, all offense, no defense teams. Think back to, I guess, those like early the early like Andy Reid Kansas City Chiefs teams before they figured things out more defensively. I would kind of make that comparison when we look at Alex's Seattle Seahawks here. They've upcoming. I'm not even mentioning their divisional games against against Lucky Chew, against Steele. They've upcoming out of division games against Lucky, Dan, Triple H, and Ben. And I don't know, I don't know if Alex, over the course of his Better League career, has really shown that he can beat users of this quality, like, whatsoever. So, despite the fact that he has, at this point, I guess, a better record than you, CMAS, a better record than Steele, a better record than Lucky Chew, I do not consider him the divisional favorite at all. We'll get to my divisional favorite in a couple spots here. But given the schedule, given, what we've seen in his, I guess, overall Better League career, I don't think he's making the playoffs. I would like him to, because I like him, but I don't think it's happening.
Well, if you don't win the division, you're not going to make the playoffs. It's pretty clear because there's too many NFC teams that are good. But man, not even giving it, not the favorite at all. That's pretty bold. I'll give him more.
And that probably means he's going to win the Super Bowl, given that I've given my predictions. So congrats, Alex.
Yeah,
sounds
Let's
good.
Move to number 16. We're going to go away from the NFC West to the NFC North with the Chicago Bears, with Cam, who has a 14th ranked offense and a 13th ranked defense.
Yeah, so anyone who listened to my last podcast episode, my last power ranking segment, this is going to pretty much sound like deja vu from what I talked about with Cam last season. They bounced between statement results and inexplicable ones pretty consistently. They had close losses against the Browns and Steelers. Again, I give people credit for close losses. Should I? That's another question, but I do. But they also struggle mightily to put teams away that they're clearly better than. Quite a lot of one-possession wins against bottom 10 users, against users that that Cam should really put away. And that's definitely concerning, especially when you're in a division that's as lethal as theirs, with, of course, the Green Bay Packers and Minnesota Vikings, both looking like playoff contenders so far. Compared to Mitch Trubisky from last season, Lane Flynn has been a true revelation. The passing offense has all of a sudden gotten much more efficient than it was last season. But keep in mind that, so far this has been against generally pretty bad pass defenses, and their schedule gets truly lethal in the second half. Again, a lot of playoff contenders on the docket here for the Chicago Bears. So will Cam be able to keep his form up in the passing game? I don't know. He's shown in past seasons that he can sometimes put it together against elite users, but given the grind of an entire season, maybe he can get an upset here or there. But again, with the NFC, as you mentioned, being as tough as it is, and given that he has the Packers and Vikings in his division, I don't see it happening. But I'd love to be proven wrong. Again, I love Cam, so I'd like to see him make the playoffs.
Perfect spot for Cam, in my opinion. Let's go ahead and move on to the top half of the league, according to Connor. Starting off in the AFC North with the Pittsburgh Steelers, with Jay Clare with the 21st ranked offense and 17th ranked defense.
Ever since the BetterCast has started, I have yelled at Jesse to go more run heavy, and it looks like he's finally listened. I doubt he listens to me. I don't think he has any respect for me, but regardless, he's gone more run heavy this season. He has yet to beat a team with a winning record. Again, you have to keep strength of schedule in mind in these power rankings. But recent results have impressed. Recent form has been solid. They had a close loss against Fern's 7-1 Cleveland Browns, and they beat the Packers and Bears. Two very solid teams there that the Steelers were able to beat, I believe, back to back. Unfortunately, I talk about out of divisional games again. I've talked about out of divisional games before. There we go. They have some coming up against Chase, King, and Dan. All three of those seem like I struggle to imagine Jesse necessarily beating any of them, given how solid they've looked all season, but could happen. But regardless, given that, I think that they have to beat both the Ravens and the Browns in the Steelers' second games against each teams to have a realistic shot at the playoffs. Because if he goes 0-3 in those out of division games, like I've said, all of a sudden that's 6 losses, and you have to. 10-6 probably isn't even getting you in the playoffs, but that's the bare minimum, in my opinion, to have a shot. So I would say, the Ravens game and the Browns game moving forward, I think he has to win both of those in order to have a true shot at the playoffs.
And Ben coming in the chat saying that the Ravens-Steelers game will be a fun one to watch. Might be a game of the week in the future. We'll see.
Well, we will see, I guess, yeah.
Moving on to number 14 with one of the better-looking users in the league, and that would be the Cardinals with CMAS with the 9th-ranked offense and the 16th-ranked defense.
Well, we finally talk about the one true supermodel in this league. Big shout out. I'm sure you would say not the most impressive start to the season necessarily, but I do think there is room for optimism moving forward. Again, the win that I've mentioned that you had in week 2 against Seattle was absolutely massive. I think that'll again impact playoff positioning moving forward. This is the first team I've talked about so far that is in the top half of the league in all statistical categories. You do not have any true weaknesses. You're pretty much, again, as I mentioned, top half in passing offense, defense, rushing offense, defense. So that's good. That level of balance I think will prove fruitful come playoff time if you end up making it there. In your 2 divisional games, even though one of them, of course, was a win against Seattle, Kyler Murray has thrown a combined 10 interceptions, and that, as I'm sure that really needs to be cleared to be cleaned up if you want to have a true shot at a Super Bowl legitimacy here. You and the Seahawks have extremely similar schedules moving forward. You pretty much play all of the same teams moving forward. So because of that, I think your second game against each other, your second divisional game, will end up deciding the division. I think that game will decide who makes the playoffs, legitimately. Because, again, it's, similar quality of user so far, extremely similar schedule, almost the same schedule. So I do think that second divisional game is going to have massive implications. And I do think once that comes up, I do think that should be considered for game of the week, especially if I end up being correct and that ends up having playoff implications. Where would you put yourself, CMS? Do you think this is about right?
I'm okay with the spot. I'm not necessarily okay with certain people that are ahead of me, but I'm okay with the spot. I feel like, and like you said, it's statistically we're great, except for one stat, which is probably the turnover margin. We're probably negative by a lot, and that's kind of what's been our downfall for the most part. Big shout out to Ben, who gave a gifted sub to Ocho. I appreciate that, Ben.
That's the first nice thing Ben's done for Ocho ever. Wow.
He'll never subscribe himself, but he'll go ahead and gift subs. I really appreciate it. Let's go ahead and move to number 13. Awesome. One of the people that I'm not okay ahead of me, which would be the Green Bay Packers with Justin Teely. That's a I don't even know what the word is when you spell it the way it sounds, but anyways, with a 7th ranked offense and the 15th ranked defense. It's an inside joke for the Better League Football Club members.
Yes, sir. Which if you're watching this and you're not a part of the Better League FC, I would absolutely recommend joining. We have a lot of fun. CMAS, I don't know how active you were in the chat today, but Justin posted a photo of a taco earlier today, and I would compare his season to the taco that he posted in that chat. Meaning, if you squint really, really hard and you pretty much lie to yourself, you might be able to convince yourself that it tastes good. Pause. I probably shouldn't phrase it that way, but that they're a solid playoff contender, I should say. But I think we all know that nothing but disappointment lies ahead when you eat into that taco and when you consider this Green Bay Packers season so far. With the exception of a Week 4 win against the Minnesota Vikings, Justin has not had a single impressive result. His remaining 3 wins were all against, again, bottom 10 competition, and he hasn't even really had a close loss against any of the other competitors that he's faced. But it should be said, Cade Bingham Jr. has been more efficient so far than his last couple seasons, which was Justin's big downfall come playoff time, was a lack of passing efficiency, and his pass defense is legitimately elite. I believe fourth in passing yards per game allowed. They've pretty much showed up against every team they've faced so far, including the ones that they've lost to. I do think Justin is going to make the playoffs. The reason for that is he has perhaps the easiest schedule of anyone remaining in the league. I believe he only plays 2 more games, I should say, against teams with winning records, and neither of those teams I would consider to be Super Bowl contenders.
Yeah, like I said.
So once again, Justin getting bailed out.
This is one that I'm not a huge fan that's ahead of me, but
that's fair.
Hopefully, if I make playoffs, I would be okay playing the Green Bay Packers there. Let's move to number 12. Number 12, another one that is questionable ahead of me, but I've never actually seen this person play. And that would be the Baltimore Ravens, who originally was my twin, Samoan, but is now
yes, sir,
Connor, with the 11th ranked offense and the 28th ranked defense.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to factor in both Samoans and my results so far in this ranking. I mean, there's no point in me trying to depersonalize this because this is my team. I had a very close win against Chapter. I had a very close win against Cook. The one bit of praise I'll give myself is that in both of those games I had to fight back from 17-point deficits, I want to say, and that's something I used to really not be capable of doing at all. I'd get tilted early and I'd just not be in the right headspace to compete moving forward. So I do think that's a good sign, but my offense is pretty atrocious. I still give up a lot of chunk plays on the ground. I'm not going to talk scheme because why would I do that on a podcast? That'd be stupid. But I don't see myself as a playoff contender moving forward. It is very possible, given the good schedule that Simone left me with, and given, I do have a relatively easy strength of schedule moving forward. I do think it's very possible that I'll make the playoffs, as a wild card contender. But I definitely should not be seen as a contender in the playoffs. I've done nothing to prove that I can beat a single playoff team, quite frankly. But 6-2 is 6-2, so I had to give myself some credit for that.
I like the confidence.
Yeah, I mean, I've never... Yeah.
Moving on to number 11, that would be the craziest user, New York Giants, Cody, with the 4th ranked offense and number 10 defense.
So, Cody's sort of put on the villainous mask this season ever since he was very correctly, in my opinion, voted the most toxic user for... quite frankly, just being a negative influence in the entire league. He's tried to be the villain this year, and it has not borne out results so far. They've yet to beat a team with over 2 wins on the season. I know. And they suffered, again, I've mentioned it before, the game that we commentated against the Eagles, they suffered that loss, which was, in retrospect, a really, really bad loss from the Giants' perspective, given that the Eagles were 2-6. I mentioned that Justin has the easiest remaining schedule in the league. Cody's probably had the easiest first half schedule of the league. He's played very, very few contenders, a lot of bottom feeders, and despite that, 5-3, not exactly the most impressive record in the world. I do give him credit for having the 2nd ranked points per game in the league. Again, I don't know if that exactly jives with what's on your PowerPoint, but he has he scores 39 points per game, and I do give him credit for that. But they yeah, I don't think they should be considered a Super Bowl contender necessarily, despite Cody's past success in this league. Again, that's in a vacuum. Remember that.
Yes. So it looks like he's got good stats, but basically you're saying it's because he hasn't played anybody.
Exactly, yeah. I talk about paper tigers all the time, like people whose stats and records are inflated by really easy schedules, and I would call Cody a paper tiger this season so far. Now he has difficult difficult games remaining, so he has a chance to prove me wrong, essentially prove that he's not that in this regular season. But so far, that's kind of where he's at.
Fair enough. Let's move into the top 10 of Better League, according to Connor. Number 10, just barely making it. Questionable choice here, but that is the New York Jets with Wozy with the 24th ranked offense, but the number 8 ranked defense.
Yeah, you said questionable choice here, and I do, in retrospect, think that part of this is because like Wozy is having maybe the most impressive start to the season that I've ever seen him have. You know, he's historically not a user that I consider to be like a playoff contender at any capacity, so I may have like overreacted to him exceeding my expectations, but it is worth considering. You know, he beat Jesse, he beat the Pittsburgh Steelers, he blew out Lucky, who is clearly I believe a Super Bowl contender so far, and only lost to Firm by 3, only lost to the Cleveland Browns by 3. So like, you know, those 3 results put together are extremely impressive, top 10 worthy in my opinion. I do still have major reservations about their passing efficiency. Sam Darnold, the starting QB, only 7 touchdowns and 15 interceptions on the year. That's very Wozy-like. He throws a lot of picks. That's just kind of been his curse as a Madden user over really the entirety of his Better League career. But, you know, given the elite defense, given, again, the very impressive results that he's had so far, I do think they should be considered the divisional favorite until proven otherwise. Not necessarily a playoff contender, especially in the AFC, which Dan pretty much owns at this point. But I do think they should be considered the favorite within the AFC East for sure.
Moving to number 9, we're going over to the AFC West with the Kansas City Chiefs, who are led by Chase with the 15th ranked offense and a top 5 defense.
Yes, sir. Other than a Week 1 55-52 win against Cody's New York Giants, who ironically we just mentioned, their resume is thoroughly unimpressive. They do not have another win against a team with a winning record. You know, his mental block against Alex has kind of become a meme, but at the same time, it's a very, very legitimate one, and it might come back to bite them in the divisional race because much like I'm projecting you and the Seahawks to have, I guess, very similar results moving forward, I'm also projecting Chase and Alex to have very similar results moving forward, given, again, a similar quality of strength of schedule, and given that they've, as we'll see very soon in these power rankings, I think they've been pretty similar in terms of their own user quality so far. Chase has to figure it out. Simply has to figure it out against Alex, because if he gets swept by Alex, I don't think he's going to win the division whatsoever. I would never tell a user as strong as Chase what to do in terms of, you know, run pass balance, but Corey Crockett, the starting halfback, averages over 8 yards per carry, and Marcus Mariota has a similar passer rating to Cade Bingham Jr. on the year. So I'm just gonna let Chase draw his own conclusions on that one.
Damn, not holding back punches here. Let's move on to number 8, which is aforementioned AFC West counterpart, the Los Angeles Chargers, led by Alex, with the 19th ranked offense and 12th ranked defense.
Once again, an elite defense is elevating a pretty mediocre offense in LA, but damn if it's not an elite defense. Like, he has clamped people up pretty much all season, and that was what carried Alex to his 2 Super Bowls earlier in the cycle. He made the AFC Championship game against Dan a couple seasons ago and very, very, very nearly won, and that is pretty much the formula that Alex has relied on all season, is an elite defense, and he continues to have it. He deserves plaudits, for giving Dan his biggest scare of the season so far. Only a 3-point win there by the Jacksonville Jaguars. And if they beat Fern, if they're able to beat the 7-1 Cleveland Browns, they will 100%. This is a near guarantee. They will be 12-3 heading into Week 17 against Kansas City. The entire rest of their schedule is against bottom feeders, and unless Alex just has like a massive, just gets upset like in a really bad way by one of those users, he should be fine. He should be 12-3. So again, Chase really got to pick it up here, because Alex definitely has the easier schedule of the two moving forward.
Moving on to number 7. He was really excited for this podcast to load up. Let's see if he's happy with the spot he got, and that's the Minnesota Vikings with Crooked King, one of the best sweepers in Better League Football Club history, with a top 5 offense and a 14th ranked defense.
Yeah, King putting the absolute clamps on people on the soccer pitch and doing the same thing on the football field. He is absurdly efficient, and he's only turned the ball over 3 times all year, which is like by far. Yeah, I know, right? It's 3 interceptions, no fumbles. By far the best in the league. No one comes close. The reason for that is, King has always, for his entire Better League career, been a heavily run first user, and this is, I think, the most fully realized version of King's, I guess, like vision as a user that we've seen all season by far. Tony Clifton, 9 yards per carry. Overall, they have the highest, or not highest rated, they have the most yards per game on the ground of anyone in the league, which is pretty typical for a King team, honestly. They also have a dominant rush defense. They are second in rush defense in the league, so clearly they win the battle of the trenches on both sides of the ball. This has sounded very complimentary so far. They also have not played a single Super Bowl competitor, in my opinion. I know they've had a pretty easy schedule, but I do give King credit. In earlier podcast episodes, including, I believe, the very last one, I was kind of questioning what King was thinking, because he just he didn't seem like he had his head fully right in terms of what he wanted to do, what scheme he wanted to employ. But this season, he is truly lethal, and I think this is King's best shot at a Super Bowl by far that he's had all cycle.
Lucky says, "Rip my season." Connor said I was a Super Bowl contender.
Well, Super Bowl favorite, Lucky. Let's be very clear.
Super Bowl favorite. I feel like that's worse. As far as for him,
I know.
Okay.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
No All worries. Right. Moving on to number 6. Number 6, we've got an NFC South team, the Atlanta Falcons, led by Ben, with the number 1 out route offense and the number 23 defense.
The outs are working. I mean, straight up, you mentioned his scheme. It's going pretty well so far. He obviously relies very heavily on his enforcers in the front 7. It has paid dividends. He has forced more fumbles on the year so far than any other team in the Better League. People questioned really how the admins and how the tier community allowed him to put together this roster, and I have some of those same questions, but regardless, it's very clearly working on the defensive side. He is 0-2 against his divisional rivals in the Bucs and the Saints. That is worrying moving forward. I question, given what we saw in the playoff game last year, and again, given the loss this year, I question whether Ocho has figured Ben out, from a schematic perspective. I'm sure Ben absolutely hates to hear that. I'm sure he's raging right now, but that's what I'm here for in this podcast. I'm here to raise those questions. Their last 5 games of the season are all very losable. They're all against top 12 teams in my power rankings. That's a specific number, I know, but that's the reality of it. And honestly, it's no guarantee that Ben makes the playoffs. He still has to play the Bucs and Saints again. He's already lost those once. Again, 3 other true playoff contenders that he has to play in that final stretch. And if he's not able to win, I'd say at least 2 of those games, once again, in that division, in the loaded NFC wildcard race, no guarantee whatsoever that he makes it.
Yeah, that's a good point, because we got somebody like Justin who's got a cupcake schedule for the rest of the year, and he's not going to win his division, more than likely. And then you've got the Saints, Falcons, more than likely going to be the other wild cards, and one of those good teams is going to have to miss. And speaking of the Saints, let's move on to the top 5 users, number 5 being those New Orleans Saints with Lucky Charm 206 with the 16th ranked offense, and damn, a good defense at number 3.
Yeah, very strong defense. They do a really good job of absolutely suffocating the teams they should beat from a defensive perspective. They've played the 49ers, the Bills, the Rams, all of them decent, but not what anyone would consider to be like a playoff contender necessarily. Sorry, Steele. But they've just absolutely clamped those teams up so far, and I give credit to Lucky for that. His main issue is he definitely needs to figure out the ground game. He's been a lot more pass heavy this year than last year, just purely when you look at the stats. I can't really go off the eye test because I haven't watched too many of his games, but he doesn't have a particularly efficient ground game. I'll put it that way. I believe he averages fewer than 5 yards per carry. And again, for a top 5 user, as you mentioned, that won't necessarily cut it come playoff time. So I do think, he definitely has accumulated a record so far where he's given himself the capacity to be able to figure that out. But that is, I think, a concern I would have come playoff time is him potentially being forced to be one-dimensional come playoff time, because again, the ground game is not that solid. I just mentioned it. I'm kind of repeating myself, but the race between Lucky and Ben for one of those wild card spots, that's really important to watch moving forward. And then, as you mentioned, Justin with just cupcake after cupcake, he'll probably be the other one. So Lucky or Ben will probably make the playoffs, not both. So we'll see what happens. I'm really excited for both of those users.
The good news is they won't need forced wins forced by the admins to get into playoffs this season. Lucky, good enough offense, great players on defense. Pass rush is really good.
Yeah,
just lost to them earlier today. It's still a little salt in the wound here.
Yeah, so we'll move on. We'll move on.
Number 4 for the top 5 teams, according to Connor Rice. We got number 4, who is the Tennessee Titans, with Triple H, Hoot Hoot Hike, with the 3rd ranked offense, but the 24th ranked defense.
I have not seen a single snap of Hoot Hoot Hike football in my life, so this is all going off the Die Leagues page. They've had a pretty weak strength of schedule so far, but you definitely can't deny their success. They're 7-1 for a reason. What they've relied on primarily is their highly efficient air attack. It's not the most explosive air attack in terms of pure yards put up, but it's highly, highly efficient. They make very few mistakes, and for it being as heavily relied on as it is, I do give Hoot Hoot Hike a lot of credit for having as efficient of a passing game as he does. People talk about users, like Dan, like Austin, as like the truly elite passers of the ball in the league, but I think Hoot Hoot Hike, based on what we've seen so far, maybe deserve some of those same plaudits. Their main concern moving forward is their defense's inability to lock down bad teams. They gave up earlier in the season 38 points to the Bills and 34 points to the Texans. That is kind of a red flag in my mind moving forward, because again, you capitulate that many chunk plays, that many points against the bad users. What are you going to do come playoff time? That's probably a pretty simplistic analysis there, but it's still fair. He should probably do a better job of making sure his defense clamps down when they should moving forward. But regardless, they've definitely earned the number 4 spot. With the 7-1 record, they've done a really good job.
Yeah, it's a good point you bring up, because what does it matter if your defense gives up 40 if you score 50, but then when you play this other users and your offense isn't playing as well, what are you going to do? So we'll see what happens in the future for Tennessee. Let's move on to number 3. We have Cleveland Browns. That's Fern with the 6th ranked offense and the number 1 ranked defense, according to Daddy Leagues in the league.
Fern is King 2.0. Fern is a better version of King, and I'm sure Dan right now is thinking that's like the most disrespectful thing I've ever said in my life. But the reason I say that is, once again, lockdown defense, second in the league, I believe. Again, I don't know what your PowerPoint says, but second in the league in terms of at least yards allowed. A truly explosive ground game, second in the league, ironically, behind King. And their passing game's good enough to get by. Fern, he'll throw turnovers, he'll turn the ball over. I think it's been pretty clear over the course of the season. But he doesn't shoot himself in the foot, and he knows himself. I think he knows his limitations very well, based on what I've seen. He goes very ground heavy, and he's really, really good at it. They, despite being number 3 in my power rankings, again, just kind of based on their record and the stats they've accumulated, they not only have they not played a single team all season, they will not play a single team all season that I consider to be an elite, true Super Bowl contender. They might have the easiest overall schedule of anyone in the league, perhaps other than Cody. And they could be a sneaky paper tiger contender. We've seen Fern come playoff time. We've seen him take early losses, come the wild card round, come the divisional round. He really hasn't made a true playoff run yet. And again, despite his highly impressive record, despite the fact that he's probably going to win his division comfortably and get a top 2 seed, I don't know, CMAS. I don't know. Have you ever seen Fern play?
Not once, and I was actually going to say that this is one of the few users that I'm not sure if I've ever even seen them talk in chat. But they win games, apparently. I've not seen him play. Yeah. Interested to see him play, but we shall see what happens in the future. And I had other things I wanted to say on this one, and I'm completely drawing a blank on that, on the Browns here.
I'll say one other thing, and and you can think about it if you want before we move on. We have like quick Better League history lesson for this aren't aware. We have had Browns users both in Madden 17 and 18 who were truly elite regular season contenders, like consistently got a top 2 seed, but they would constantly get early exits in the playoffs. I'm thinking of Sam Smith specifically from Madden 17. For those of you who were around the Better League in Madden 17, y'all will remember what I'm talking about. And I worry that Fern is the Madden 20 version of Sam Smith. Would love to be proven wrong, we'll see. But that's my concern, I guess, through this cycle so far.
We shall see. Let's go ahead and move on to the top 2 users. And remember, this is Connor's opinion, not mine. And these rankings are Connor's opinion, not mine. And number 1B, he has the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with Ocho with the 2nd ranked offense and the number 4 ranked defense, 1B.
Extraordinarily close margin between this user and 1A, and I'm sure you all probably know who that is at one point, but I won't say it in case you haven't put that together yet. After a surprise Super Bowl berth, I think people were mildly surprised that Ocho made the Super Bowl. This team looks to be the clear favorites in the NFC so far. They have by far the most dominant pass rush in the league. They've acquired 52 sacks on the year, which is 10 more. Than the next leading pass rush. They win their games by an average of 26 points per game, which is the most of anyone in the league. Kellen Balaj over 11 yards per carry, CMAS.
Oh my god.
Now I say all that, you think, well, clearly he's the number 1 user. Like, are you stupid? The reason he's 1B is his air attack concerns me. His efficiency through the air concerns me. He has a 1-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio so far, which, not horrible, like that won't kill you, but at the same time, when you look at these top 10 users, all of them, not all of them, that's probably overreactionary, but most Super Bowl contenders over the course of, I'd say, the Better League's history have had far more efficient air attacks than that. And, we did see in the Super Bowl, especially in that first half, we saw Ocho throw 2 or 3 early interceptions, and he really struggled from there. Even though he ended up being able to, come back and make it a closer game, he really put himself in a hole early. And I worry, again, with the lack of efficiency of the air attack, I worry that we'll see that kind of come to fruition come playoff time. But with that being said, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers clearly, in my opinion, the favorite in the NFC. I don't even think it's close. My next highest rated NFC team is the New Orleans Saints, right? And I think the Bucs are a clear step ahead of the Saints so far this season. So yeah, I would consider Ocho to be the clear, at least NFC favorite.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with that. And Fern in the chat, very excited, saying, "Let's go, baby." So telling me to get excited. I'm pretty excited for you, buddy. That's the first time I've seen him talk in chat, so we're best friends now.
Yeah. Hi, Fern. I've never interacted with you, but how's it going?
Yeah, pretty much.
Like, literally, yeah.
He tagged me. I was just like, I didn't even know he knew how to work Slack. I just assumed somebody's been messaging him on Xbox. But anyways. All right, moving on to the other number 1 team, number 1A, for those of you that are good at, eliminating other options. That brings us to the Jacksonville Jaguars, the current Super Bowl champion. Just recently had his banner put up today on Daddy League, so the number 13 ranked offense, number 2 ranked defense.
Yep, and I believe this is actually the first time I've ever ranked Dan number 1 in my power rankings, which, on its face is pretty stupid considering there's won multiple Super Bowls. But again, I'm pretty bad at this, as y'all can tell. Quite simply, and again, this is not with the past Super Bowl in mind, this is this season only in a vacuum. Quite simply, they have the best combination, in my opinion, of an explosive offense and lockdown defense there is against a pretty difficult schedule. He has played so far a slightly harder schedule than the Buccaneers, and that was, again, one of the other things that factored into me ending up giving Dan the 1A slot. A slight flaw, and this is not, I don't think this is something that'll rear its head come playoff time, because Dan is obviously, a really, really experienced user. He'll know how to counteract this. But weirdly enough, they are the most penalized team in the league so far, and I don't know why that is. I don't know. It maybe a lot of pass interferences. Maybe Dan just getting unlucky with face masks and stuff. I don't know, but I just thought that was kind of an interesting tidbit to throw in there. For being the number 1 ranked team in my power rankings, they're also on their face the least disciplined team in the league, and again, don't know why that is. I'd love to hear Dan's insights in the chat if he has any, but maybe that ends up playing a role moving forward. I doubt it will. I was kind of looking for something to worry about. I'll be honest with you, but
it's an interesting
that's
stat.
it. Yeah,
interesting stat that in your opinion, the best team in the league has the most penalties in the league as well. I'm not sure like if that's by one penalty or just like a lot, but either way, that's a pretty interesting stat, and I don't think a lot of people argue. Although technically, you didn't rank him, a tied number one almost, essentially.
I suppose so, yeah.
With Ocho, but nonetheless, that brings us to the end of the list of the power rankings, and then on this next screen, so Dan says I click on too much and get PIs, so that's why he gets.
Fair enough. And real quickly, CMS, before we move on to our next segment, what would you say is the placement that you disagree with the most? Where do you think I was like just flat out wrong in these power rankings?
I'm looking back at it.
Sounds good.
I think the one that jumped out to me the most was Wosey.
At number 10, yeah.
Yeah, but then you mentioned a couple of teams that he had played, and I was like, what, those are pretty good users that he beat. But that was the first one that initially when you sent this to me, I was just like, wow, okay. He's being pretty high on that one. And then let's see what else really jumped out at me. There's one that I thought was too low. I think it was Morty, but then again, I haven't really seen him play this year. But anybody in chat, feel free. The whole list is up on the screen right now, 1 through 32. 32 being acid trash. Number 1A being the Jacksonville Jaguars, and then interesting note, I put on there the divisional power rankings based on the individual rankings you gave. So basically, I just added up. So Dolphins is 32nd. I added 32 points. Added all the division teams together, and then whoever had the least was number 1. Number 1 being the NFC South, according to Connor and according to his power rankings. And I've sent you this before. After putting this together and then looking at these rankings of the divisions, do you agree with how it kind of shaked out?
Well, I'm pulling them up real quickly. I'll just speak on the NFC South first. I mean, I don't really think there's much denying that the NFC South is the best division in the league, I should say. I mean, you have two, in my opinion, true Super Bowl contenders this year in Ocho and Lucky. You have a man in Ben who has won a Super Bowl previously, who looks to be, I'd say, at least a playoff contender this year. I forget exactly where it was in my power rankings, but he was definitely up there. So when you look at a 1 through 3 of any division, like that's, I mean, not only is that as good as it gets this season, like that's about as good as I can remember any division having all cycle long. So yeah, I don't particularly disagree with that. And now that I have the full rankings up, let me see. NFC East last. I mean, the Cowboys and Eagles are. Yeah. I'm just kind of like processing it real quick. I mean, I don't see, and also thank you for doing this. This is a really cool touch. I don't see anything that like hugely jumps out at me as being like flat out wrong, but I'm sure people can quibble with like specific results, but I don't think there was anything that was just like outright wrong, like on its face. I don't know.
Biasly, I say, if that's even a word, NFC West being a little low. But the biggest thing that jumped out at me, and I made sure to make it somewhat obvious by color coding it, but essentially when I look at this list and then also the list right underneath it, top 10 users by conference, it looks like you're clearly saying that the AFC is better than the NFC. Do you agree with that statement?
Well, I would say that the AFC has more elite users than the NFC. I do think probably when you look at like overall depth, I think it's fair to say that the NFC probably has more perhaps average or above average users than the AFC does. I think the AFC has like a really good top 5 or 6, and then it kind of falls off a cliff from there. But you're looking specifically at the top 10. I mean, yeah, that feels right to me. It feels right to say that the AFC has more like true Super Bowl contenders than the NFC does. Like I don't disagree with that.
Well, then also in the divisional rankings, 3 of the top 4 AFC divisions. So
right.
And then the NFC is just really bringing it down.
Yeah, I would think, just like thinking over everything, I would think that the AFC East is probably the worst division in the league. So I probably like, if I could do it over, maybe I would like take a harder look at that. Whether I was perhaps being a bit too harsh to a couple of the NFC East teams, but overall, Yeah, I feel like this is about right. And keep in mind, y'all, like the NFC South is clearly number one. Like they should almost be in their own tier, honestly.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. So that concludes Connor's Power Rankings. We're going to be moving on to the next segment, which will be the mailbag section for questions and thoughts and stuff like that you all have put in. Feel free in the Twitch chat to add more to this. But with your permission, we'll go ahead and move on to the first question in the mailbag. Let me know if you're good.
Yeah, let's do it. I'm ready.
First question. Question 1. How do the Chiefs overcome, quote, the mental block coming from our user Chase?
Well, I mean, keep in mind that I have mental blocks against like almost every elite user in this league, so I may not be the best person to ask here. I do think like, so the whole thing that Chase complains about is that Alex runs a ton of cover 2 man, and while that may be true and while that may be frustrating to go against, I mean, Alex, as I mentioned again, the power rankings, Alex's LA Chargers lock down almost every team they play. I mean, surely, like, especially given that he has Tyreek Hill and given that he has one of the most explosive receiving cores in the league, I mean, surely he can run some more man beaters, some more, quick routes, maybe run more of like a West Coast offense. I do think that's something I've noticed about Chase in general is like he's kind of like how Ben was earlier in the cycle, where he'll try to go deep to Tyreek Hill, in my opinion, way too much at the expense of having, I guess, a more holistic passing offense where he's distributing the ball more efficiently and being more unpredictable with his route combinations. So I think that's a big part of it is like Alex, probably has a pretty good sense of Chase's scheme, play by play at this point. So just try to, maybe go into practice mode, try to run some route combinations that you're, not as familiar with, that you're not necessarily as comfortable with, but that that Chase, or excuse me, that Alex won't see coming. CMS, what do you think? Like, have you ever had a user that you just feel like totally clueless against?
So not necessarily clueless, but there's been users that like, there's a certain way that I like to play the game, and then there's a certain way that's really easy to stop that. And so some users, that's kind of how they normally play. And so when you play somebody that plays kind of like the yin to your yang, it sucks, and you feel like you're up against a wall and you can't figure out why you got to beat them. And so the way to overcome that is to stop playing the way you normally play and play different against that user. So I have that instant where certain times I've been more pass heavy than not. Then I, come out really running the ball and doing different things. So you got to really mix it up, like a lot of people do with their divisional teams. That they'll, they played them so much that they'll occasionally throw in a couple wrinkles and stuff like that just to mix it up. You really got to do that against teams like that. But it sounds like he's having the most trouble with the defense. Watch YouTube, figure out how to beat man defense. It's not that hard. A lot of wheels.
For sure, yeah. It sounds like I pretty much agree. Just, run different schemes ultimately is what it comes down to. Make yourself less predictable. Make Alex think. Alex is probably being proactive in terms of, imposing his scheme upon you. Make Alex think. Make Alex have to like change up, do things that he's not comfortable with, because Alex is not, some god at Madden necessarily. Like he'll make mistakes. So I think that would definitely be. It sounds like both of our advice to Chase.
I'd say he's a top 10 user. Wouldn't you agree?
I mean, borderline, yeah.
Moving on to question number 2. Question number 2 coming from Ben. It says, what is your M21 Dream Division and the Nightmare Division in terms of opponents, starting with the Dream Division?
All right, well, I'm not going to do the obvious thing and say, like, Mike and chat roll and stuff, because, like, that's just boring to hear, and I don't feel like beating up on people anymore. In terms of above average users that I've always felt pretty confident against, I would say Morty. I believe I have a winning record against Morty overall. I just match up with him well. Like, I don't know what it is. Like, I want to say I'm 3-1 against him overall, but regardless, I've always felt confident playing Morty. For whatever reason, like, I'm definitely not the person who can break down like specific like schematic reasons for why that is, but I would definitely say again, in terms of above average users, I would say Morty. I would actually say Ben, because I think I love going against pass heavy users. I have had some success against Ben historically. I mean, I definitely have a losing record against him, but given his overall success, I think I've done like reasonably well against him. So I would say Morty and Ben. A third user that I've been like historically pretty good against. I'm gonna for the sake of not having dead air, I'll tell you my nightmare division now, and then if I can think of a third person in my dream division, I will. My nightmare division absolutely begins with Alex. I have not beaten Alex since the first season of Madden 18.
Wow.
He owns me. He has something like a 15-game winning streak against me. It's bad. Like I feel abused at this point, honestly. Like it's not good. I don't ever want to play Alex again. I would say Chase. I would say Chase's user linebacker again is perhaps the most formidable in the league, and he knows my route combinations, he knows how I like to play, and he shuts me down more often than not. My third user in terms of nightmare division, I would have to say, I would have to say Dan, I guess, and that's like not. I mean, Dan's probably in everyone's nightmare division at this point, but I mean, the dude's just really good, and like I'm pretty predictable in terms of my offensive play calling, and I think Dan, more than perhaps any other user in this league, like once he gets a sense of what I want to do, he'll do everything to just completely shut me down, and I'll have no quarter, like it'll be rough. While I think of a third person for my dream division, who would you put in terms of like your dream division and nightmare division?
Well, to be fair, I feel like I don't know enough to,
Okay.
But as
That's
far
fair.
as for me, for Dream Division is a better division. So they almost would be the same thing, because I would want to play the better guys, but then I also wouldn't at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned Dan, and you said he'd be in everybody's. He would be in mine too, mostly just because I feel like I'd learn a lot playing him. I feel like seems like he really studies the game. I may be wrong. He might just be really good. But it just really seems like he knows the game really well, and I feel like when I played him, it was a lot of fun because it was like a chess match. I like playing Ocho a lot. I've played him in Git as well. I like playing him. He's still trash in my opinion, but
Facts.
I like playing him. And then I have to have Justin in the division just so. I feel like for whatever reason, he's somebody that like anytime we play him, it seems like EA Sports is like he's gonna get every animation he needs to win, and that seems to happen a lot. So. For content's sake, for my stream, the clips of me just freaking out usually happens with Justin.
I would actually also put, now that you mentioned it, I would also put Justin in my division but for a different reason. I just need someone to beat up on. Like that's just simple and plain. Like if I'm in a tough division with two other elite users, like I need that guy who I just like go into the game. I see Justin lining up across the field for me, and I'm like, oh, this is a guaranteed dub.
Absolutely. Well, let's go ahead and move on to question 3 then, coming from Dan. Actually, it says, if M21 on next gen is not compatible with it on current gen, would that mean the end of CFM's connected franchise modes as we know it?
No, I mean not the end. No, I mean that's a very like overtly declarative thing to say. I will say it would make like the logistics of keeping long time CFMs like the Better League, like Gridiron, Throne, etc. together. That would make it a lot more difficult, but it wouldn't be the end. I mean, people will adapt. Ultimately, everyone will end up transitioning to the next gen anyway. So like, it may be kind of rough for like the first year or so while everyone makes that transition. But I mean that feels a little like overly. What's the word? Yeah, just like.
I don't know the word.
Overly. I don't know the word. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. This is what happens in the podcast CMS. Is like I'll get to a certain point in the podcast, and then I'll just start like it's like I'm 8 years old again. Like I can't talk.
Well, so for this, they've not announced it, but they've made it seemingly clear that Madden will probably be going cross-platform. Now I know that's not from generation to generation, but I can't think that they'd have the ability to go cross-platform for Xbox to PlayStation, but not be able to go from Xbox One to Series X.
Yeah.
But I would think that, most people, I mean, the game comes out in August and then they go till about June. Majority of people aren't getting the Series X or the PlayStation 5 as soon as it comes out. They usually wait. And so I would anticipate that the majority of the users will still have the old gen up until pretty much the end of the Madden anyways. And then the next Madden is probably when most people will have the next generation console, if that became an issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, definitely not the end of CFMs, but I mean, as you said, I can't imagine that Madden won't be backwards compatible, with the current generation and the next generation. It's just, especially for a franchise that releases games yearly. Like, that's just really tough to believe that they won't have
And
that capability.
They also confirmed that if you buy 20 for Xbox, that it's free for Series X. So I would think that, if it's free for the next gen, that you can still play against people that had the old one. But
Yeah,
we'll see.
Yeah, for sure.
Moving on to question number 4, coming from Dan as well. This is a doozy. How important is the team selection process in your eyes? Let's go ahead and start off with that one, and we'll move on to the next ones. How important is the team selection process in your eyes?
How important is the team selection process? Well, I mean, it's definitely, diminishing return. Like, starting off with a really good team, definitely diminishing returns as the cycle goes on. I think it's a lot more important for like the middling users, like myself, I guess Justin is another example, like users who can be competitive like on their day, but who aren't necessarily Super Bowl competitors. I think it's probably more important for us because in those first, I've always said in my podcast, like, especially in the first season of a CFM, when everyone's still kind of like getting used to like what the meta is in that specific Madden, getting used to the new gameplay mechanics, etc. The first season of any CFM is when, an above average, but not necessarily like elite user can make a Super Bowl run. Because, maybe they've just figured things out quicker than everyone else, and, people are still kind of like struggling to reach that elite tier that they were. So I would say it's pretty important for like me, but for like Dan, I don't know. I mean, especially people who are like really, really good at team building, I don't see it as being a massive deal. What team you end up with necessarily, because ultimately by season 3 or so, or maybe season 4, that team's all yours anyway. You've pretty much done what you want with it at that point.
How much of an advantage is it to have a high lottery pick?
Oh, well, like, I kind of have the same answer to that. I think it's more of an advantage for users at like the quality level of myself than it is, the true Super Bowl competitors in this league. I wouldn't like, it's one of the most fun parts of being in a CFM is, the whole lottery process, and then, picking your teams and seeing them revealed on a Coda Youngson stream. Like, it's incredibly fun, but it's not some massive like game-changing thing necessarily. Now, I will say, unless you get like, Tyreek Hill, like maybe you end up with like Kansas City Chiefs or something, unless you get someone like a game-breaking player who just like cannot be contained pretty much no matter what you do. Well, if you know how to use Lamar Jackson, then yes. But I think, yeah, with a couple of exceptions, I wouldn't say it's like massively important.
And then essentially kind of the same question, but worded a different way. Yeah. Will those users have more success next cycle because of their top team selection?
Yeah. Again, not to repeat myself, early on perhaps, but I think by season 3 or 4, it's the team's pretty much yours anyway. Do you... Go ahead, sorry. I was just gonna say, like, do you disagree with anything? Do you disagree with anything I said there? Like,
No, absolutely not. I think that for like, if you use the example for Justin, if Justin gets the best best rated Madden team season 1, he's definitely going to be a lot more likely to compete in season 1. But then eventually he'll go back to what he normally is, which is a top 15 user in your opinion.
Exactly.
So, but that first season he could potentially compete even further than he normally would. So I think that's pretty much the only advantage. How do y'all? So here's my question. As far as that goes with the second question, how much of an advantage the high lottery pick? What's the difference as far as, you might not know this off the top of your head, but like between the top lottery ball holder and the worst lottery ball holder, what's usually like the difference of amount of balls?
I think that's a conversation that's still being had among the admins. I can say that for the last lottery selection, we had a group of, I'd say, about 5 or 6 people that have pretty much been in the league since the beginning that had 10 balls, and then we essentially had 5 groups, and the first group got 10 balls, the second group got 8, the third got 6, the second got, or the fourth got 4. Yeah.
All right. So
10, 8, 6, 4, 2 are the groupings essentially.
Not a huge difference. Okay.
Yeah, it's not completely stacked against you, but yeah, if you've like just joined the league like a month before the lottery, yeah, you're probably not getting a high pick.
Probably not.
Unless you get
I've
lucky.
seen it happen before.
Yeah, actually, yeah. Like last lottery, we had a guy with only 2 ping pong balls get the first pick, which was kind of frustrating because he left the league like 2 weeks later. But yeah.
Question 5. This one's from Wosey. You kind of answered somewhat, but does Wosey have a true chance at the playoffs this season with leading the division at the halfway point?
But yeah, I mean, not only do you have a chance of making the playoffs, Wosey, I think you should be considered the divisional favorite at this point. I mean, I think the schedule breaks out pretty well for you. I think you've been pretty clearly, in my opinion, the most impressive user in that division so far. The one thing I will say about Wosey, and this is out of a vacuum, this is his overall his overall tenure as a Better League user. He's had a lot of seasons, especially Madden 18, where he had a strong start, and whether it's from getting overconfident or other people figuring out, like he would have a strong start, but then in the second half of the season, he would go on a losing streak, like he would fade away. He would kind of like get negative about himself and end up missing the playoffs. So, I mean, I can't say for sure whether that'll happen this year. I don't know, but that is like there is precedent for him, blowing a divisional lead. I wouldn't be shocked if that happens by any stretch. But yeah, you should be considered the favorite at this point, was it?
Question number 6. And of course, this comes from Justin Teeley. Ass or titties? And then also your wild card breakout user for 21.
To quote Stephen A. Smith, I'm a booty, legs, and hips man myself. Let's see. My wild card breakout user for 21. Well, that's kind of tough to answer because we don't know any of the gameplay mechanics, how it's going to play or anything like that. Yeah, I mean, I've always said I think at this point Chase, if he's not the best user in the league to have not won a Super Bowl this one, he's definitely like the most accomplished user to have not won a Super Bowl. So I mean, I would hope that, if Chase remains dedicated to the league, I would hope that eventually he'll have that breakthrough and he'll be able to make the Super Bowl. So I'll say Chase. That's kind of a shot in the dark, given that we don't know a ton about Madden 21's mechanics. But I think he's probably the best user at this point to have not won a Super Bowl. So I'll go with Chase.
Was it the wildcard breakout user, or was it the best user that hasn't won a Super Bowl?
Well, I think he meant breakout users and who hasn't had a ton of success that I guess yeah. I mean that's kind of the only way I really know how to answer that, because it's tough to say otherwise,
Yeah, I mean with the little information you have, definitely could be tough to answer.
Right. Yeah.
Question 7 from Mike. Why do lower NFC teams give stronger AFC teams trouble?
Well, I'd like to remind Mike that he gave up 82 points once. Let's see. Why did lower NFC teams? I don't know. I mean, as an AFC user, I can't abide by this whole NFC supremacy narrative anymore. It's one that's a narrative that I, leaned on very heavily in Madden 17 and 18 being an NFC user, but I can't. Yeah, I can't do that anymore.
Ironic.
Yeah, for sure. Mike, I would just say worry about your own team because
Ooh.
I know.
Got him. Mike, 30th ranked according to Connor. Question number 8, and I think this is the final question. Top 3 most crazy improved. Top 3 most crazy improved surprising users of M20. I'll go ahead and go with that one first.
Sure. Yeah, as much as I've been ripping on him, I do think Justin comes to mind. I mean, with the in his non-Madden 20 Better League career, with the exception of one miracle Super Bowl run he really had not been a consistent presence in terms of playoff competition necessarily. But I do think he's done a better job at consistently figuring things out this season, and that is despite again being in a decent division. I mean, not the strongest division by any stretch, but no cupcakes in there either. So I do give Justin credit for that. Ocho. Well, I don't know. He hasn't won a Super Bowl, does he, Mass? I don't know. Okay, Ben. Ben actually comes to mind.
Okay.
Yeah, fair enough. But Ben's actually a better answer here. Yeah, he has taken a massive step up. I remember in Madden 18, I once shut out Ben, and I felt like while I was playing him, I was like, this is one of the worst Madden users I've ever played in my life, in the Better League. And 2 years later, here he is, just able to dominate me whenever he wants. So that's definitely a crazy improved user so far. I mean, it almost feels unfair to say Alex because he is again a past Super Bowl champion, but I don't think anyone saw him winning 2 consecutive Super Bowls coming. I kind of thought after Madden 18, once we had an influx of truly elite talent like from City, from Gridiron Throne, etc. I did not see Alex as like really a Super Bowl competitor moving forward, heading into the Madden 20 cycle, I should say. And the fact that he won 2 consecutive is really, really impressive. So yeah, I would say what was it? Justin, Ben, and Alex.
Who are the top 3 users? I think Cody's trying to get you to avoid the vacuum here, and go top 3 users of Madden 20.
Well, I think you have to say Alex and Dan first and foremost. They're the only users who have won 2 Super Bowls in this cycle, so you kind of have to say them by default. Third's kind of tough. Kind of depends on whether you're talking about early cycle or late cycle, right? Like,
it says all of Madden 21. Or sorry, Madden 20.
I will say Ben, and the reason for that is, he came very close to beating Cloud's winning streak, over the course of 2 consecutive seasons. He put together just like a massive winning streak. I can't remember the exact number, but it was truly dominant for a long period of time. And it's also important to remember that Ben's been in one of the hardest divisions in the league for the entire cycle, and despite that, he's pretty much dominated it since day one. Well, other than last season, but before that, he was dominating it for a very long time. So, yeah, I would say Alex, Dan, and Ben, I think, come to mind.
Yeah, I mean, Ben going undefeated. I mean, you would think somebody going undefeated Super Bowl champion's got to be one of the better users, even just for that season. Last question, which is going to be tough to answer, which Super Bowl winner of M21?
CMAS.
Yeah, okay. For real, though.
Well, I don't know. I mean...
Yeah, no, it's like... It's a toss-up.
Yeah, I mean, if the whole, like... People have argued that it's kind of like a cycle where, like, one cycle, like, running is the meta. The next cycle, you're better off going through the air, etc. Like, if that, and we've kind of seen that through, Madden 17, 18, 19, 20 so far. If that holds true, and if passing becomes the norm in Madden 21, like, if the running game is kind of de-emphasized, I should say, in Madden 21, I would say at that point Dan has to be the heavy favorite, because he is the most consistently efficient and excellent passer in the league. So I would say Dan, if that theory is true, which I have no idea if it is.
That is usually the trend for EA, that when somebody wins a Madden Club Championship without completing a pass in any of his games, I forgot about that. They would focus on passing the ball. So I would assume that it would be more pass heavy. Or I think Cody's the one that always says it. It's just like, this one's run, this one's pass, this one's run, this one's pass. So
yeah, that's pretty much what I was referring to. Yeah, is that whole idea. Yeah.
So that's the last of the mailbag. I didn't see any questions in the Twitch chat or the Slack chat. So for those that are still with us, I really appreciate you checking into the BetterCast here. Connor, do you have any closing thoughts?
Well, first off, I'll say once again, CMAS, thank you so much for doing this. I do think, like, the production value on this BetterCast is much, much higher than it's been in any one previous. So thank you for adding that. I appreciate it. I'll just say, I guess it's pretty much it. I'm just like, thank you all for listening. I'll get a little sentimental here and say, once I released my initial podcast, which was essentially me just, rambling for a half hour about Madden 17 with, like, I had no structure, no plan, whatever. I never thought that it would grow into, like, a truly anticipated thing, and I appreciate you all for buying into it, I guess. So thank you, and CMAS, thank you once again, of course. Thank you for having me. Well,
Dan says, hold up, what about my third question? Now I'm thinking I missed something. I don't think I did, though.
Well, those users some more specific. I mean, he essentially asked the same question 3 times, honestly.
We did go over that, Dan, unless there was another section.
We talked about that.
Yeah, of questions, because you're the only person that had 2. You had question 3 and question 4, which is essentially like 4 questions altogether.
Right.
So I feel like we covered you pretty well, Dan, and you were number 1A. So, like, chill, bro.
Yeah.
Chill.
So give other people a chance.
Anyways, thank you all for tuning in to BetterCast. I gotta get used to saying that. Tuning into BetterCast, you're very welcome for upping the production value. I remember listening to my very first BetterCast and remember them saying it's a podcast, and then I was wondering, where are the visuals? And I was like, oh, right, podcasts are usually just hearing
audio. Yeah.
So I have Connor. I have Connor 3 questions. That was 2. Sorry, Dan. You missed your chance. Time's up. We're out of here. Thank you all for tuning in. Hope you have a fantastic rest of your night. Thank you, Ben, for saying great work, guys. I'll go ahead and speak for Connor and say, fuck you. That's normally what he'd say.
Yeah, all of you can go fuck yourself. That would be my closing thought.
Good luck the rest of the season, guys. Have a good night.